Hello and welcome to another dose of Dr. Owen's Muscle Medicine. This video is all about the key non-negotiable for both muscle growth and muscle strength, progressive overload. Expect to learn the following. What is progressive overload? Why is it the only effective long-term way to build muscle strength and/or size? And how can I effectively incorporate progressive overload to achieve my fitness goals? Part 1. What is progressive overload? Progressive overload is the underpinning methodology on which all long-term successful training plans for strength training and muscle growth, or hypertrophy, are based. It can be viewed as a staircase in which small incremental steps of increasing intensity of resistance against which our muscles must contract, (the stimulus) provokes small incremental step changes in the size and strength of our muscles, (the adaptation). How you choose to design your own staircase depends both on your character and your goals. For example, somebody who is risk averse, perhaps with a history of injury, may prefer to take many more smaller steps than somebody who is a little bit more gung-ho, who will set up their staircase with larger increments in pursuit of their goals. The two primary forms of adaptation that we see to the stimulus of high-intensity resistance training are muscle growth, or hypertrophy, and neuronal adaptation. Neuronal adaptation describes forging better, more efficient links between the pre-existing muscle tissue and the brain. This enhances our ability to recruit the muscle we already have, so it increases our strength independent of the muscle size. Muscular hypertrophy grows both size and strength of the muscle. Very high load, low repetition resistance training in the 1 to 5 repetition range near our 1 rep max has been found to be the most effective way of provoking neuronal adaptation, whereas muscular hypertrophy can be just as easily affected and achieved at slightly lower loads and slightly higher repetitions, and although there isn't complete consensus, this tends to be somewhere between 5 and 25 repetitions. People training for size may choose to train in this range rather than at the lower 1 to 5 rep range because it gives more wiggle room and a lower risk of injury. This explains one of the core fundamental difference in training programs between those individuals that are strength focused and those that are size focused. Either way, the general principle is you need to keep incrementally increasing the intensity of work your resistance training imposes on your muscles to continue to make incremental strength and size gains. Incidentally, progressive overload is also the underpinning methodology behind cardiovascular training, but with a different stimulus, for example running faster, causing different adaptations, usually in the form of heart and lung function improvements or increased capillarization of the muscles, which means to develop the network of blood vessels within the muscle to increase the efficiency of delivery of nutrients and removal of waste products from the muscle tissue. Part 2. Why is progressive overload the only effective way of building muscle strength and size over time? The reason for this is that our bodies are adaptable, but they aren't wasteful, and they aren't evolved for the 21st century excesses of food and security that we currently experience here in the West. Genetically, our bodies are pretty much indistinguishable from our hunter-gatherer predecessors. Back then, food was scarce and undereating was more common than overeating. Genes for building muscle when it was not needed were not competitive, and people that had the genes that led to a tendency to grow and maintain muscles that weren't needed were at a competitive disadvantage. Despite what the Liver King's followers might have you believe, growing muscles purely for an aesthetic reason offered our ancestors no survivability or reproductivity benefits. Again, we are not genetically programmed to build and maintain mountains of muscle without due cause. To coax our bodies into developing the strength we want and the muscle size we desire, we have to continually subject it to situations in which having more muscle is beneficial. This is because servicing, maintaining, and regenerating muscle tissue demands more energy and nutrients than does storing excess calories in the form of fat or adipose tissue. Okay, fair enough, but it's 2023. Do we have to follow this approach for progressive overload? Is there not a quicker or easier alternative? Question 1. Can we run up the stairs? Attempting to take the next step too quickly by introducing the next harder stimulus without adequate time and rest for the previous adaptation to take place is called overtraining, and an overtrained body, one that's pre-fatigued before you start your workout, is one more prone to injury, and an injured body isn't climbing the stairs. Question 2. Can we take several steps at a time? Big step leaps in the size of the stimulus also increase our risk of injury by exposing our muscles, tendons and bones to a stimulus they are not capable of handling, and that can lead to them breaking under the pressure, Again, an injured body is not climbing the staircase, and not only that, whilst you're lying on the sofa recovering, you are steadily but surely falling down the staircase because the stimulus for change has been removed, and with it, the biological advantage of having muscles that are big and strong. Question 3. Do we have to take the stairs at all? Isn't there a lift? Well, our ancestors, the ones who couldn't afford to carry around purely aesthetic muscle, didn't have the necessary technology to take the lift. They also lacked the necessary technology to fiddle with our body's biochemistry, specifically our hormone levels. Nowadays, we can take the lift, but to do so is to break the law, and I do not recommend doing so. Testosterone, when injected, is a performance-enhancing drug, and mostly it is used by people that are training to speed up recovery to allow them to take steps more frequently. But studies have also shown that untrained adults who put significant amounts of testosterone into their body in the form of injections can increase their strength and size of their muscles without resistance training. Where the lift analogy falls apart is that you cannot walk away from taking testosterone freely without messing up your hormonal balance. Instead, testosterone injections carry a number of serious risks and potential side effects, including but not limited to wasting of the testes, heart disease, gynecomastia, and liver disease, amongst many, many more. Also, in the case of using testosterone without resistance training, you will be getting off the lift on a lower floor than if you were to focus on resistance training. Part 3 is how to effectively implement progressive overload and is split in two. The first bit covers the stimulus. Regarding the stimulus, the most important thing to avoid is to do the same workout again and again and expect continued progressive adaptation. Instead, what you'll get is an initial adaptation when this workout is new and challenging to you, but from then on you'll be exerting a lot of time and energy in staying exactly where you are. This is of course fine if you're completely content with your current size and strength. If, however, you're not and are looking to progress onwards, then the definition of muscle building insanity would be to apply the same stimulus over and over and expect continued muscle growth. So, what can you do? There are 3 main solid ways of progressing overload over time, and a few others with some weaker or mixed evidence behind them. We'll cover the 3 main ones first. First up, you can increase the weight or size of resistance applied to the muscles. This can be done by working your way along the weight rack or down the weight stack, and is very popular because the numerical changes it yields are extremely easy to see and gratifying. It also has the positive of increasing the intensity of progressive overload without increasing the duration of your sessions. This principle could also be applied to resistance bands by progressively introducing thicker and thicker bands. So long as the size of the increments isn't oversized and you're not overtraining or neglecting small muscle groups, there aren't really any major downsides to increasing the weight of the stimulus, provided you have access to a well-equipped gym. The problem arises when you don't have the equipment to increase the stimulus by small enough increments, and therefore you get to a level where you're comfortable at one weight without being able to safely or effectively lift the next. When this happens, you'll need to switch out your mode of increasing the progressive overload stimulus. The second mode of increasing progressive overload is to increase the number of repetitions per set. There are pros and cons of this approach. Pros are, it's effective and favourable if you cannot easily increase the weight, perhaps because you've got a limited selection of weights, e.g. in calisthenics, where the weight available may actually decrease in size if your exercise is paired with a disciplined diet for weight loss. A major con of this approach is that there seems to be a diminishing return on your investment beyond around 20 repetitions, though there is disagreement over the exact number. Beyond this, the stimulus tends to resemble more endurance or cardiovascular style training, and therefore the adaptations made are not those of strength and hypertrophy. It can also be a very time-consuming way of progressing overload. The third reliable mode of progressing overload is to increase the number of sets performed. For example, one week you may do 3 sets of 10 repetitions and then the next time perform 4 sets of 8 repetitions. One pro of this is that it can be achieved without any additional equipment, and the big downside is that, again, it's very time consuming and you reach a point of diminishing returns where muscles are pre-fatigued from previous sets and therefore not able to undergo quality contractions approaching what would normally be their limits of muscular fatigue. The combination of weight lifted times by the number of repetitions times by the number of sets equals the training volume, and training volume closely correlates with muscle gains as long as the intensity of the training is sufficiently high that you approach to near muscle failure with each set, thus challenging the muscle to provoke adaptation. Now, you may be aware of a few other modes of progressive overload. These include, but are not limited to, time under tension and decreasing rest time between sets. These are both ways commonly employed to drive progressive overload, but have weaker or mixed evidence as to their effect. Covering first time under tension, a recent 2016 meta-analysis found that so long as your sets of resistance training are approaching near to muscular fatigue, there was no statistically significant benefit of any particular time length of repetition between half a second and 8 seconds. As for decreasing the rest time between sets, people want to believe in this because most of the other strategies we've addressed increase the length of your sessions. But if we're still knackered from the previous set, we end up reaching failure prematurely in the next, not because we don't have the strength to keep going, but because our ATP and phosphocreatine stores are still depleted from the last set. If you want to learn more about these, feel free to watch my How Creatine Works video after this one. The pre-fatigue essentially erects a barrier that prevents us from being able to approach the failure point for that muscle and that particular exercise. Now, general rules of thumb that definitely don't apply for everyone, but do have general use. For hypertrophy training, repetitions between 5 and 15 per set, and sets of 2 to 4 tend to yield pretty good results without being too laborious. Within that framework, there's plenty of room for increasing weights, reps, and sets. For muscular strength, keeping load high and repetitions low works according to the principle of specificity, which is that our adaptations closely mirror our training, and therefore, if you want to lift up a really heavy thing and put it down once, your training needs to closely resemble that act itself. Lastly, a very important tip for progressive overload is to log your workouts either using an app or old-fashioned pen and paper. Having a record of your previous workouts suggests to you how you can easily increase the progressive overload, increase the stimulus, and it prevents you from inadvertently failing to progress through reapplying the same stimulus over and over. Okay, now on to the adaptation part of how to get the most from your progressive overload training. So, each time you successfully apply a stimulus for muscle change, you need to back that up by creating an environment that allows for that change to be implemented. This involves good nutrition, including a rich variety of vitamins and nutrients essential to muscle growth, and enough protein with a recommended 1.6 grams per kilo body weight per day being found in a recent meta-analysis of resistance training for both strength and hypertrophy to be effective for almost all adults without leaving any possible gains on the table. You also need to get good quality and good quantity of sleep, and you need to not be overly stressed, as high degrees of stress can prevent us from entering that rest or digest mode where repair and growth occur. Now, whether or not your own routine for adaptation is working can be assessed by asking yourself the following 2 questions. 1. When I return to the gym to train that specific muscle group, do I feel good and ready to go? If not, it's probably worth waiting a little longer. 2. Are the numbers, either weight, sets, or reps, moving in the right direction? If the answer to this is no, despite repeatedly hitting your muscles with an adequately intense stimulus to provoke change, then it is your adaptation that you need to focus on. Thank you for watching this video. If you want more science-based, fad-free fitness, nutrition, and supplement explainer videos from me, a medical doctor and chemist, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.